I used to be a real estate agent, and one of the biggest mistakes buyers would make when it comes to negotiating is taking two steps. And I'm going to explain what that is. I'm going to give you some information so you don't make this mistake if you look to purchase a property. My name's Dion. I'm a buyer's agent and I work in Melbourne, Australia. I used to be a real estate agent before I became a buyer's agent. So firsthand, I saw a lot of buyers make some silly mistakes when they really didn't need to, which quite often led to them paying a lot more than they needed to make. To give an example on what can go wrong and how to avoid this, pretty much what it looks like from your perspective as a buyer is you see your dream property, you go along to your dream property and they say it's worth anywhere between, and in Melbourne, Australia, our quoting system is sort of unique. We have a quote on a property, which is 10% or up to 10%. So they say that your property you really like is between $9,000 to $990,000 and you really like that property. You go along and you make an offer at $950,000, right? Sort of in the middle of the range. And the real estate agent comes back to you and says, thank you for your offer. We've presented it to our vendors. At this stage, you'd need to be in a high position to purchase the property. You would need to increase your offer. You would need to pay more. And what a lot of buyers do from here, that's quite a normal example, and that might happen to you if you make an offer. But what a lot of buyers will do, the mistake they'll make is they'll go back and they won't ask any questions. And then they'll go back and they'll increase their offer, and they might increase their offer to $970,000. And they go back and they increase to $970,000. The real estate agent will come back to them and say, yep, look, that's a great offer. That's a lot better. And the vendors are a lot more open to accepting that. They're going to counter offer you at $990,000. And you think, great, well, I can go to $980 and split the difference. And you do so. And then they close the deal maybe at $980, or they get a bit cheeky and ask for $985. And you go, that's fantastic. I've got a little bit of a discount, so I win. But really, they won that negotiation because you moved potentially more than you needed to move. Now, this is just all an example, and obviously it's not always perfect when it comes to negotiating on properties. And in this example, you are the only buyer. Sometimes you have to factor in more competition, and we will do other videos explaining what to do when there's competition as well, so you increase your chances of purchasing the property and not missing out, and also how to work out if that competition actually exists, or potentially if that competition is weaker than it's getting told to you really is. So we can explain how you can do some things to sort of minimize the risk on both those examples. But in today's example, it's a one-on-one negotiation. Now, where the buyer in that example went wrong is the agent came back to him and said, you need to increase your offer. You need to be more. And the buyer comes back and offers more. They've given two offers with nothing in return. If you make an offer as a buyer, you should get something back. You've played your cards, it's time for them to play theirs. So if you make an offer at $950,000, you need to get a counter offer from the agent. That is the number one goal of a first offer. And so a really common question I'll get from a lot of buyers is, oh, well, where do I start my offer? Where I like to start my offer is always in a position where I can get a counter offer so I know what I'm working with. You could see a range of $9 to $990. And again, this is just Melbourne's laws when it comes to pricing, but the vendor could want $850 or the vendor could want 1.2, okay? The $9 to $990 is just a quote, and it's a guide for buyers, but it doesn't say a vendor's accepted price is here. Now, even if where you are negotiating, or even if it's in Melbourne and it has a single asking price of $990,000, I will still position my first offer always to get a counter offer if it's a one-on-one negotiation. So I know what the vendor's expectations are. I want a buy now price, because once I have a buy now price, then I can get to work and we can match that up to where we see value and see if we can get the vendor down a little bit. So the first mistake the buyer made was not getting a counter offer. So if you offer $950,000 and the agent comes back to you and says you need to offer more, you need to go back and say, well, what are the vendors prepared to sell at? And it is fair to ask that question. What is their counteroffer? What is the buy now price? Because if I'm going to give you another offer, I need to know where they're at. Because more, you need to offer more, could be $1,000. It could be $1. It could be a cent, but it could also be 100,000. So as a buyer, you don't want to go and offer more and you give 10,000 more, but more was really 960. How do you know? Because you never asked the question. And when you get better at negotiating, you'll understand that negotiation is more asking questions rather than giving numbers. And the best negotiators when it comes to real estate ask more questions so they know what numbers to give. They don't just go and give numbers and then hope to get information back from that. So you're at $950,000, the real estate agent comes back and says you need to offer more. As a buyer, you go back and say, I need a counter offer. I need to know what the vendor's prepared to sell at. that vendor comes back and counters you at $990. And then all of a sudden from there, you can work with that $990. And let's just say you split the difference on that example, you might end up at $970. And all of a sudden, you've got a discount from the $980, the $985 you previously paid when you didn't need to give your $970. You didn't need to give that $20,000 increase for no reason. So if you're a buyer and you're negotiating, do not double step. You need to get a counter offer. And once you have a counter offer, you have more information make a better educated decision.